tonight, U.S. President Barack Obama is pushing back against pressure to abandon his plans for military action against Syria. The U.S. says that country allegedly used chemical weapons on its own citizens last month. Mr. Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin remain at odds over the crisis. At separate news conferences on Friday, both leaders expressed their views. President Putin said that any foreign military strike on Syria would be illegal. But President Obama says the regime of President Bashar al-Assad must be held accountable.
The Assad's regime's brazen use of chemical weapons isn't just a Syrian tragedy. It's a threat to global peace and security. Syria's escalating use of chemical weapons threatens its neighbors: Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Israel. It threatens to further destabilize the Middle East. It increases the risk that these weapons will fall into the hands of terrorist groups. But more broadly, it threatens to unravel the international norm against chemical weapons embraced by 189 nations, and those nations represent 98% of the world's people. Failing to respond to this breach of this international norm would send a signal to rogue nations, authoritarian regimes, and terrorist organizations that they can develop and use weapons of mass destruction and not pay a consequence. And that's not the world that we want to live in.
The White House says President Obama will have more to say on Syria in a nationally televised address on Tuesday evening. As world leaders discuss potential solutions to ending the conflict in war-torn Syria, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, says that 5,000 to 6,000 men and women, children, are fleeing the fighting and streaming across borders each day. For more on the plight of the Syrian refugees, we are joined by Africa 54's MWAKALYELYE. Hello, Ndimi.
Hi, Vincent. Thank you. Well, the UN says more than 2 million people have now fled the fighting in Syria's civil war. As families await potential airstrikes from the U.S. military, they are fleeing faster than ever. Heather Murdoch reports on the fallout in Lebanon from villages near the Syrian border.
At this center in eastern Lebanon, Syrian refugees wait as workers unload bread for distribution. Bassam Kaza, who runs the center, says they depend almost entirely on private donations. And as the war drags on, donations are getting smaller, while the refugee population gets bigger.
I feel sorry because, see, we have here, very serious problems. And this serious problem, and nobody taking care of it. For example, we have a lot of women don't have, any support.
Down the road, at an abandoned building, 5 Syrian families are camping out. With no windows or doors, this woman, who fled Damascus, says the 16 children in the house are already cold, and it's still summer in Lebanon. But she says they had no choice but to leave their home.
There is no security in our country. We were scared for our children, so we had no choice but to get out.
The woman and her neighbors say they are afraid the limited resources for refugees in Lebanon will not be enough to go around if people keep coming. Aid workers say newcomers have been pouring across the nearby border since U.S. President Barack Obama said he wants airstrikes on Syria to punish the regime for an alleged chemical weapons attack that the United States says killed more than 1,400 people last month.
This house here, that house over here, our neighbor here, when they come, it's coming one family, 5-6 people came here. Now we have 49 people in this house.
Khalid says officials have responded by refusing some people entry at the border, and that many villages in Bekaa now have more refugees than residents. Refugees say border crossing is easy, but they complain that more and more people are being turned away. They hope their relatives come soon, they add, before it gets even harder. As refugees pour in, ministers of Syria's neighbors officially promised this week they will not close their borders. But along with the United Nations, they issued an urgent plea for more international help. Heather Murdoch for VOA News, Bekaa Valley, Lebanon.
And joining us now to discuss this further is Shelly Pitterman, UNHCR Regional Representative for the United States and the Caribbean, and he joins us here on Africa 54. Thank you so much, Mr. Pitterman, for being here.
My pleasure.
Just hearing
Thank you.
these numbers, 2 million plus outside, 3 million plus within Syria, it's so overwhelming. How is UNHCR coping?
UNHCR has been working very closely in collaboration with a host of partners to respond to this emerging crisis. The bulk of the refugees have come over just within the last year. But we have to pay testimony to the countries of asylum, to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Iraq, to Turkey, for all that they've done in the first instance to allow the borders to remain open for the refugees to find safety. It has been a remarkable challenge. We've upped our staff, we've upped our budgets, we've upped our emergency response capacity in an unprecedented way since perhaps the Rwandan genocide in 1994, when we had more than 1 million people as well flowing over into neighboring countries.
So the UN says you need about $3.something billion to meet the needs of these displaced people internally and externally. Is there money?
There is money, there is generosity. It's falling short of our budgets. We're now funded at around 40%. I have to mention that the United States has been a very significant contributor to UNHCR and to others who are working alongside. But we are still anxiously and actively pursuing all possible funding options. I want to mention that at the end of this month, the report mentioned it as well, the foreign ministers of the neighboring countries have agreed that there should be a major effort, and on the 30th of September, in line with our executive committee meeting, we'll be having a special segment about the Syrian situation. We hope to be able to generate more commitments of support, but it goes beyond helping the refugees. It also focuses on building financial support to help the host populations, because they're really impacted very significantly by these movements.
Especially when you note like Lebanon has 720,000. That's a lot to take on. What about private donations outside international donors, countries? Do you also solicit money from just regular people or companies?
Regular people and companies like you and I.
Oh, really?
In fact, we do depend a lot on private sector support. I'd be happy to mention the website that viewers can go to in order to learn more and to act and to see how they might be able to help. The website address is unrefugees.org, and through that website, your viewers will be able to contribute any amount and to learn more about what's going on in relation to the Syrian refugee crisis.
Well, Africa has always been a hotbed for refugees. There's an overwhelming need there. I can just imagine how much this is stretching the UNHCR's efforts on the continent. Is it?
Indeed, it is. It's important to recognize that a lot of the hospitality that we've witnessed in Syria, and in Syria, of course, but also in Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey, is very, very reminiscent of the way refugees are treated in Africa. So there should be this sense of empathy with the Syrian refugee crisis. In Africa, we have ongoing challenges. Both protracted refugee situations in Sudan, Somalia. We still have tens of thousands of Somali refugees in the Dadaab refugee camp, for example, in Kenya, and in the west, in the east, in the south. And the Sahelian refugee crisis linked to the destabilization in Mali as well. So we've had a coupling of both the protracted refugee situations and internally displaced, as well as new emerging refugee situations in eastern Kivu, in the DRC, as well as in the Central African Republic.
Stretching already overstretched resources and
Absolutely.
needs. And unfortunately, we have to leave it there. But thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you
Shelly
very much.
Pitterman of the UNHCR. He's the regional representative for the U.S. in the Caribbean, and he joined us here on Africa 54.